Hello everyone, welcome to Taiwan Bar. Our topic today is something we kinda know and kinda don't know. Taiwanese culture, which of course is more than just pig blood cakes, long working hours, and overpriced apartments. Taiwan's most beautiful scenery isn't just people either, because culture includes eating and sleeping and everything in life. To get to know more about Taiwanese culture, let's start with language. Language is not only for talking, protesting, or singing, it symbolizes one's identity or culture. People who speak Japanese are seen as Japanese. People who speak Cantonese are seen as Hong Kongers. People who speak Mandarin are seen as, Mandarinese? People can hardly recognize where Mandarin speakers are from. Here's some food for thought. Besides families who spoke Mandarin all along, why is it that some parents speak flawless Hokkien, Hakka, or Aboriginal languages with their elders, but switch to Mandarin when they're speaking to us, the younger generation? Why is it that some elders don't necessarily speak Mandarin, but we all indubitably do? How did Mandarin Chinese become the national language, and how did it influence Taiwanese culture? Here we go! When it comes to establishing the national language, Taiwan has done it twice. The first time was the national language movement under Japanese rule. Although the national language at that time was of course Japanese, languages people used to speak in Taiwan were not banned. Therefore, Hokkien, Hakka, and Aboriginal languages were still used. In the 1930s, intellectuals in Taiwan began using Japanese as a key to connect with the world. So a bunch of writers who wrote in Japanese sprung out, like Lü Heruo or Yang Kui. During that time, Japanese novels written by Taiwanese were amazing, comparable to those written by Japanese writers. Yang Kui was the first Taiwanese writer to make an impact in Japanese literature. In 1945, after the ROC government took over Taiwan, they found the Taiwanese acting like Japanese wannabes. Something had to be done to set them straight. So they started with language, the most important element of daily life. Use of Japanese was completely prohibited, which rendered the new-gen Taiwanese intellectuals who wrote in Japanese useless, sending them from max-level full ammo all the way back to Newbieville. See you later! There is no later. Compared to the Governor General, who only restricted Mandarin and Taiwanese after 40 years of ruling, the ROC government prohibiting Japanese right away seemed a little more aggressive. In addition to prohibiting Japanese immediately, the official language was replaced with, guess what? Not Hokkien, not Hakka, nor any Aboriginal language, but standard Mandarin Chinese modified from the Beijing dialect. The government even formed the National Languages Promotion Committee to strongly promote the Chinese we speak nowadays, shoving it into people's daily lives. Although speaking Chinese is natural for us today, it was like a foreign language to locals at that time. Most citizens didn't even know how to speak the language. In the 1950s, the government used the education system as a tool to promote Mandarin. They prohibited speaking dialects in all schools. If you got caught speaking dialects in school, you might be fined or punished by wearing a sign around your neck saying, "I won't speak dialects again." Sometimes you have to find a second person speaking dialects to pass on the punishment, becoming this messed up version of tag. Punished students with the sign were isolated because people were afraid to talk to them, talk about bullying encouraged by the school. The strangest thing was, this Dialect Prohibiting Act only prohibited Taiwanese dialects. In 1949, people who followed the ROC government to Taiwan came from different provinces of China, and of course brought over their own dialects. But people were free to speak Shandong dialects, Shanghai dialects, or Sichuan dialects. Only those who spoke Taiwanese dialects would get punished. All kinds of punishment and mocking caused by the Mandarin promotion not only damaged children's dignity, but made them think that using their mother tongue was a shame, and that Mandarin was the more patriotic or sophisticated language to use. They even corrected their grandparents when they got home. Maybe it was this double standard that made Mandarin with a Taiwanese accent a laughingstock, even until today. In order to let everyone speak fluent Mandarin, schools taught students the standard pronunciation. And this is why Mandarin competitions are held in schools nowadays. Reciting and speech contests required students to speak with this funky intonation, a skill that could never be helpful in any situation in life. But why do we still hold these competitions now? Aside from putting pressure on education, TV, which was as important as Wi-Fi nowadays, was strictly regulated on the languages it used to broadcast. For example, The Scholar Swordsman, a show which most middle-aged folks are familiar with, was one of the victims during the Mandarin promotion. In 1970, The Scholar Swordsman was a huge hit after its first broadcast. The protagonist, Shi Yanwen, became a famous hero, probably more popular than Batman. Every noon, families would stop what they were doing and sit in front of the TV to watch the show. National viewing ratings were up to 97%. With that kind of popularity, you bet the government snuck up their back and forced them to rewrite their scripts over and over. The crew was even forced to create a character that sings, "Mighty China, China is the mightiest of all," every time it appears. And guess what that guy's called? China Strong. This puppetry show that originally used Hokkien created this confusing character that wore the national flag and sang Mandarin. You're messing with my head! Although people were a little confused, the rating of the puppetry show was still high. After 583 episodes, Chiang Kai-shek finally killed the show. In 1974, the Government Information Office prohibited Taiwan television to broadcast The Scholar Swordsman due to hampering farmers' daily activities. Are you kidding me? Along with the Mandarin promotion, other ridiculous policies were established. For example, Hokkien programs were only to be broadcasted an hour a day. No more than 2 Hokkien songs could be played per day, not to mention programs that spoke Hakka or Aboriginal languages. This became a cultural catastrophe to Taiwanese languages, forcing many Taiwanese to lose the chance to learn their own language and culture. Until today, fewer and fewer youngsters are able to understand their mother tongue. Under this cultural environment with Mandarin at its core, the ROC government used all kinds of propaganda to sneak its ideology into our lives. In 1949, after the ROC government settled in Taiwan, taking over Chinese mainland became their golden slogan. They didn't care if you wanted to or not. They forced the ideologies of anti-communism and the Sanming Doctrine onto their citizens. Textbooks were also all written by the National Institute for Compilation and Translation. In the 1950s, the China Youth Anti-Communist Corps was founded. It became the hotbed of developing teenagers' political ideology. Military personnel went into campuses and became military instructors in high schools and colleges. They taught students political ideology and military trainings. Things like Chinese basic cultural studies, sinology, the Sanming Doctrine, and speeches of Chiang Kai-shek all became very important educational content. Under the background of temporary provisions effective during the period of communist rebellion, controlling education was a convenient way to consolidate power. Aside from education, the government did not overlook cultural development. They supervised that through laws and banned all books and songs that contradicted with the government. In literature, they encouraged homesick articles that wrote about the mainland China and articles on fire in the hole, combat literature. In the 1960s, Western culture came pouring in Taiwan as a result of the US aid. Restrictions against Western culture were much looser compared to Taiwanese culture. Teenagers enjoyed the energetic Western culture. Western pop music was super popular at that time. Modernism in Western literature also entered Taiwan. Like Taipei People, written by Bai Xianyong, was one of the greatest work in the 1960s. Hold on a sec. Let's clarify something real quick. Speaking of Aborigines, you might assume that Aborigines had always been Aborigines. However, Taiwan's Aborigines weren't named Aborigines until the 90s. In the past, when ruled by different governments, the Aborigines had different names. When the ROC government came, in order to showcase their tolerance, they viewed the Aborigines as their besties. And because the Aborigines lived in the mountains, they were named Sandi Tongbao. But Sandi Tongbao were never bathed in Chinese culture, so they must be re-educated. The government used all kinds of ways to speed up the Sinicization of Aborigines. For example, the Wu Feng legend during Japanese rule was edited into textbooks in the KMT era, spreading the image that Sandi Tongbao were barbarians and Wu Feng was a hero, sacrificing himself to save people. This was like educating the Aborigines that their culture was awful, but we treated you like civilized beings, so come on, turn into one of us. As for their names, the KMT wanted the Aborigines to change their names, just like the Japanese did. For example, my friend's name is Bang Za, and his dad's name is Ling Dui, But after Sinicization, his dad's Chinese name became Ling Den, and his whole family got the last name Ling. Hello everyone! The KMT's policies changed the Aborigines' traditional social structure. Not only did they smear their cultural identification and feelings, but also it deepened their cultural inferiority. They would try very hard to become a real Chinese. Many children grew up through cultural denial, afraid to admit who they really were, and faced discrimination from their peers. When facing the dominant Han Chinese culture and authority, how could the Aborigines protect their own culture? After all that talk, we probably still don't fully understand Taiwanese culture. After all, culture simply isn't a topic that can be covered in just a few minutes. But through some stories about languages, we might be able to see how people tried to mold the culture into the way they wanted. We can also reflect on whether these methods were good or bad. Language bears culture. Losing a language is like a kite losing its string, or a page not found. Everything must start anew. Those who lost their language can only search for a new identity and tell themselves who they really are through that. It was once said, if you want to destroy a country, destroy its language. Due to the same reason, after Taiwan became a more democratic and free country, multiculturalism became an aim. But has Taiwan really embraced multiculturalism? Cross-cultural marriages and the introduction of foreign labor brought in immigrants and new cultures. This island has been accepting people from different places since forever. But how have the citizens of this island reacted to those new faces? I believe we all feel for and love Taiwanese culture deeply. But if we concentrate too much on self-identification and hold a little too tight on nationalism, won't it be a bit dangerous? After all, you might also be a foreigner to other people. If we look further back in time, aren't all our ancestors on this island foreigners? Alrighty, after all that talk, I'm a bit thirsty. After 8 episodes, are you more interested in learning about Taiwan? What is Taiwanese after all? After this last glass of wine, we'll leave those questions for you to think about. The animated history of Taiwan from Taiwan Bar Studio. We'll see you next time.